everybody, and welcome back to your favorite podcast in the entire world in Spotify and all of the land of Google and Apple, Death in Cambodia, Life in America. It is Dorothy, your host today, bringing back to you another amazing guest. I am so excited to have him on. It's been back and forth. We've actually met in person, had an amazing conversation, knew I had to have him on the podcast. His name is Jean-Baptiste Phou. He is a French-Cambodian writer, director, and artist born in Paris in 1981. He worked in international finance before starting an artistic career in 2008. And from then, he's been an actor, director, producer, theater owner, working alongside with many well-known producers such as Rithy Panh. Based in Phnom Penh since 2017, he acted as the head of creative programs for NGO Cambodian Living Arts until 2020, so not too long ago. And he's explored different art mediums like Soundworks, created The Color of Desire, and My Mother's Tongue. Last but not least, we will talk about the books that he has written. He is the author of 2 books, 80 Words from Cambodia, which is only in French, but another one was written out in English, Coming Out of My Skin, which was presented in a staged reading. He completely messed that up. He's going to correct me after this. That happened in 2004. Jean-Baptiste, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dorothy, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here as well.
Thank you for coming on. And how do we say that correctly? Please let everybody know.
You mean Musée du Quai Branly?
There it is. There it is,
Yeah.
everybody. Well, Jean, I think when I speak about my experience, I really can only speak about what it's like being a Cambodian in America. That is where I am. But from what I know, being a Cambodian French is a completely different experience. I know you were born in Paris.
Mhm.
What can you kind of share with the listeners as we go all the way back? What was your experience growing up when you think about your childhood, growing up as a French Cambodian?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I can talk a little bit about the context because I think the American and the French context are a bit different in terms of the immigration. Because
Sure.
as far as I know, most of the Cambodian, refugees that arrived in the States arrived after, the end of the Khmer Rouge and through refugee camps. Immigration in Cambodia, from Cambodia to the United States probably started in the 80s, right? Like after 79 at least.
Mhm.
But in France, like there was a more recent immigration than that because of the ties, like between France and Cambodia. So actually, even before the Khmer Rouge arrived in 75, Cambodians started to immigrate to France, those who could, because it was already civil war, right? Like from 1970. And even before that, like wealthy families who wanted to send their children for education. So even before, like in the 60s or 70s, there were already, links between France and Cambodia. So there was kind of a diaspora already. And the demographic is also a bit different because in France, we also have a lot of Chinese Cambodian, you know, people with mixed race, and I'm part of that. So the reason why I'm saying this is because actually my family immigrated uh, from Cambodia before the Khmer Rouge. So my father arrived in 73 and my mother in January 75. And we are of a Chinese Cambodian family. And then, of course, there's something more similar to the United States. Like after the end of the Khmer Rouge, after the refugee camps, there were like the big waves of immigration of Cambodians to France. And so for me, growing up as I would say like French, Chinese, Cambodian, because I feel I have the 3 identities,
Sure, sure.
it was, I didn't have quite a conscious of what it was because for me, everything was mixed. I didn't even know what was Cambodian, what was Chinese, because at home we didn't really talk and the culture was passed on without much explanation. For example, the way we would pray, we just, you know, put the stick incense, and that's it. We don't know who we're praying, why we're praying. When we have like ceremonies, when we go to pagoda, we don't know what we are doing there. Is it Khmer? Is it Buddhist? Is it something else? We don't really know. We just follow. I just followed what my parents told me, right? So in my childhood, I would say I was in touch, you know, to I was in touch with my Cambodian and my Chinese heritage, but only at home, right? Only through my parents, but through actions and food and like religion and stuff like that. But it wasn't really something transmitted, right? So it was more like a background, if it makes any sense, like something I saw, something I was immersed to, but without really trying to understand. Because my parents didn't actually talk much about their life before France, what it was, how it was for them in Cambodia, what they did, how they arrived in France. Like even the things I told you just before during the introduction, the whole context, that's something I found out as an adult in my 30s. Growing up, I had no idea whatsoever where they're from. Are they Chinese? Are they Khmer? What year they arrived? Like I had no idea whatsoever. But that's something I researched on later. Yeah,
Yeah.
and my case is not really isolated because later on, when I started to do work around Cambodia and meet other Cambodian diaspora in France, I realized a lot of us share the same story of disconnection. And even though I grew up in the south of Paris, close to like a large Asian community, we were not close to the community. We lived, in a house a little bit separated. Sometimes we would, have social events. My parents would hold like karaoke session or barbecues, or we go to the pagoda, but that was it, right? I was not like totally growing up with the community. So for me, it was mainly, I would say, the French identity that was more predominant, especially in the French context where we don't really celebrate, the idea of melting pot. It's more about being French and only French, right? Even the idea of saying I'm French Cambodian, it kind of raises issues here. I mean, there in France, because people don't like that. Unless you hold two passports, you can say you're binational, and that's okay. But to claim yourself as French slash something else, yeah, people don't really embrace this idea because for the in France we like to think of more assimilation. You need to assimilate to the French culture, to the French language, the French identity, and kind of erase the other part of yourself. So growing up there, like going to school, working in France. So it's kind of how I grew up thinking that, okay, I'm only French. And that kind of Chinese Cambodian is just something in the background, but that's not so important.
Right. Did you find it did you find that your parents found it difficult to assimilate to this culture that required them to assimilate? Did you find that difficult for them while growing up?
Yeah, definitely. Because so my father could speak French quite okay. So he could write in French, could speak French. But for my mom, it was harder because when she moved to France, she was already an adult, a young adult. She couldn't speak the language. So it was hard for her to pick up, the French language. So she would speak kind of like a broken French. And of course, in France, bureaucracy is it's a headache, right? So I remember me as a kid, I was like, I don't know, 10 years old. And I had to deal with the paperwork at home, like write all the admin stuff for the house. So I was kind of being an adult in the house as well, like growing up. And I think sorry, I need a little bit of water. So yeah, part of them wanted to integrate and assimilate that culture. And I think that's why, um, they try to really not transmit so much about their own culture, probably. And at the same time, well, they still try to keep something, right? Like the food they would cook, the music they would listen to, the language they would speak, it would still be Chinese with us, Khmer between themselves and their family. But somehow I feel they had to kind of put that aside in order to integrate to this ideal French idea of what an immigrant should.
Yeah. Do you think that potentially that was a reason why when you grew older in your 20s and 30s, you had this kind of energy and resurgence to dive into your identity a bit more? Do you think that is the case for, and it's hard to answer this question, but I guess the thought in my head is I wonder how that cultural pressure and the difference between France and America, and that it's less of a melting pot. I wonder how that affects people's questioning of their identities in France versus in America. I mean,
So,
in both countries, you would have the identity conversation is going to find you in either country, right?
sure,
But I
sure.
wonder how that difference affects each
Yeah.
experience.
Well, I think, growing up, when you have this kind of discourse, right? Like you are only French, and if you do everything by the book, we're going to recognize you as such. That's what we believe, right? Like if we do everything right, then the country is going to recognize us as such and not make any difference in terms of treatment. But the reality is totally different from
Mhm.
school to work life to social life to romantic life. Everybody see color, right?
Right,
Even though
right.
they claim to be colorblind, but in reality, at school, you're Asian, so you're expected to perform a certain way. When you go to work, you look Asian, so people would expect you to have certain skills, whatever. So that's kind of the projection we have, right? And then there's this discrimination and sometimes even racism that we saw during COVID-19 and other kind of events that targeted Asian people. So what a lot of us realize is that even though we do everything they say, it still doesn't work, right? They still don't see
Mhm.
us as purely French. So it starts to question us, right? And that it was my case as well. Like growing up, I didn't put too much thought around that. But then when I become a young adult, I realized that, well, actually, as hard as they claim that I'm only French, that's not how they treat me. And I feel there's something else. I know there's something else. And I've kind of blocked that for a long time. But then it resurfaced, right? So it
Mhm.
resurfaced for me when I was a young adult, around, I would say, my early 20s. And
Mhm.
that's when I started to get interested about my roots, about my Chinese and my Cambodian heritage. And even though growing up I didn't have much connection with it, I started to do my own research because at home, we didn't have that culture of talking and sharing. So it was not easy just all of a sudden to go into my parents and ask them questions because we didn't have that habit anyway. So for me, it was more going through books, watching films, traveling to Cambodia for the first time, like creating that reconnection by myself at the beginning.
Mhm, mhm. I think you mentioned this need to conform, especially in a country that tells you this is the way it should be, and these are the things you need to be doing in order for us to really accept you in a society, which, let's face it, we're all human. That's what we're gonna try to do. When you look back in your history, we think about how you've turned into the artist that you are today. Previously, though, believe it or not, you used to work in finance, people. So you had such a long journey and this kind of wave of finding yourself, finding your art, finding your voice. Let's talk a little bit about that journey to becoming the
Hmm.
artist that you are today. And, you started as a child in France, and then I know that you've done a lot of international business after that. Take us through kind of your timeline and when you actually became an artist.
Sure. I mean, my life is a little bit chaotic, and you can find out more in the book. We're going to talk about that later. But
Right.
actually, so to make it short, so I quit school when I was 17 and I did like different things. I did small jobs because I didn't have any qualification. And I went back to school at the age of 22. And from there, what I tried to do is, in a way, conform to society's expectation in terms of success, like career success, financial success. So I pushed as hard as I could when I went back to school, and that was in France. So I ended up studying in one of the most prestigious business school in France called ESCP. And that led me to start an international career in banking. So I started my career in Spain and then moved to Singapore, and I used to work as a business analyst. But once I was there, I felt it wasn't for me at all. I just hated it. It didn't fit my personality, it didn't fit my interest. But I just wanted to challenge myself, like to see what it's like to really live the life that looks or seems successful, like according to the society's criteria. But once I was there, I saw that it wasn't for me. And it was also at the same time, we're talking about reconnection to the roots and exploring that part of the identity. So that all almost happened at the same time, right? During my early mid 20s. So once I was in Singapore working for this international bank, I was in Asia, right? It was my first time living in Asia. So that also changed a lot of things for me in my perception because growing up in France, I didn't have any kind of representation of Asians in the media, or when there were representations, they were caricatures, they were cliche, kind of martial art expert or something like that. But there was nothing else, right? So when I moved to Asia, to Singapore, I saw that everything was possible, right? Like you could be anything from, the person who would collect the garbage to politician to TV host to artist to, I don't know, lawyer. So I was like, wow, actually, yeah, I don't need to delimit myself, right? So, and that also happened in a time where I was reconnecting with Cambodia because Singapore was so close, to Cambodia. So I could just take a flight for the weekend and spend 2 days in Cambodia and go back. So I used to do that a lot because I wanted to kind of learn everything I could about Cambodia. So it was in the mid 2000,
Mhm.
2006, 2007. And the situation of Cambodia was quite different from what it is today. I mean, the country was more, I would say, rough in a way, like,
Yes, yes. I mean, it's definitely so modern now. I mean, the last time I went to Cambodia, I was in middle school, and it was probably around the same time. So, I mean,
mm,
you land in Phnom Penh, and there's, like, you see a cow walking by, so it's completely
exactly.
different now.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something I needed at that time, right? I needed kind of that bare experience, like just being thrown in like another reality and understand how that reality connects to my own story. So I was going through a big, big crisis. It was so that now we're talking about 2008. I was like in a professional crisis, personal crisis because I was living in a relationship that didn't go well. And then personal identity crisis because like who am I, what am I doing here? So everything happened kind of the same time. So and it was when in 2008 I heard of a musical that was going to be produced in Cambodia. It was called Where Elephants Weep, and it was a Cambodian American production, and they were looking for actors and dancers and singers. And I thought like, oh, you know what? I used to sing when I was a child. I sing in my shower in the bathroom. So why not give it a try? Um, and I did. And, I went through some auditions and they gave me a part. And I didn't think twice. I just resigned and went to Cambodia to be part of that production. But, at that time, it was a bit like an impulse. I just did it because I hated what I was doing. There was something else, something new. I didn't really know what was going to happen after that. I didn't have like a career plan in my head. It was just like, okay, there's an opportunity. I'm just going to jump, take it, take a leap of faith, and then see what's going to happen. And here I am, 15 years, more than 15 years later, still in the art. So I mean, there's like a long journey in between, right? But when I look back, I'm still kind of impressed because I didn't expect that to happen. To be honest, the contract was just 2 months, right? You're gonna rehearse, go on stage, perform a couple of times, and that's it. And I could have gone back, to my previous life, take another job in finance, go back to France, go somewhere else. But then I thought, no, I feel there's something for me here. I feel there's something for me in the arts. I feel there's something for me in Cambodia. And then, yeah, I decided to explore that part. And it's been going on for more than 15 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of and something that I feel like a lot of people struggle with is allowing yourself to live your authentic self and your
Mhm.
authentic life, the life that you truly want to be living. And um, I I bet you so many listeners can relate to that experience of trying to live and conform and at least test and see
Yeah.
if this amazing status quo successful life is really what it's all cracked up to be. You tried that out, you realized it wasn't for you, and you've been in the arts ever since. I mean, I think it's incredible when you look back at your resume and see what you've done. I mean, you started as an actor and you jumped right in on an impulse. But since then, you're an actor, you're a director, producer. I know you worked alongside with Rithy Panh
Mhm.
on one of his, I believe it's one of his, is it short films that he
It
created?
was one of his feature film, The Missing Picture.
Feature films. Okay, okay. Can you talk to me a little bit about that experience? And I don't know where that falls with your timeline, but he's so famous and he's
I
so
know.
well known. So I'd love to just hear about your experience and how you fell into that.
Sure. So that was in 2013 for his film, The Missing Picture. So it was
Mhm.
actually when he got nominated for the Oscar. And then, because the film, so I don't know if you're familiar, that's one of his greatest film, and I encourage everybody to go watch it. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing work. So Rithy Panh, for those who don't know him, so there might be a few people who still don't know him. So I'm just going to give a little bit
Sure,
of
please
background. So
do.
he's
Yes.
a filmmaker. His work essentially doing documentaries, but also some fiction films. We have he's done a lot of work around the Cambodian genocide, interviewing, for example, uh, doing like he did a documentary around him, or he did a documentary on, and also like the kind of social reality of Cambodia after the war. So his work is incredible. And in 2013, so he did this film called The Missing Picture that was kind of about his life, and it's a bit I would not say experimental because people kind of have different perception of that, but a little bit experimental in its form because he uses clay, like clay,
Mm.
like he had somebody like an artist creating these little
Like
characters.
statues, yeah. Caricatures, yeah.
Yeah, and they don't move, they're not animated, so they're just scenes of like you know clay characters being in an action, and it's just the camera doing that. And while the camera does that through these different scenes, there's a voice, there's a narrator that talks about that is supposed to be Rithy's memories from his childhood until now, because he was 13 at the time. The Khmer Rouge took over, I
Mhm.
think around 13, right? So he kind of recalls, and the scenes that he recreates are not like actual scenes with actors, but they're just those clay, figures. So the whole film is like that. It's just this voiceover and these scenes. So he asked me to do the English version because it was originally in French, but when he was nominated for the Oscar, so the film was, and Americans, they want to have everything in English, right? They don't like to read subtitles.
That
So
is
at that time,
true. That is true.
so he asked me to do the English version, and I was so honored. I was like, "Are you sure, Richie? I have a big accent when I speak English. That's gonna sound weird." Like, no, that's what we want because that's also his identity, right? He was born in Cambodia, but then moved to France, and also like he feels like he has a kind of also multiple identities and cultures within him. So he thought it would be more authentic somehow if the person speaking would have like this French accent. It's like, okay, let me give it a try. And it was an amazing experience. We were in the studio together. It was quite intense because we did everything in one day. It's like a feature film, an hour 30 of voiceover. So it's like, oh my God, it was so intense. But the way he directed me was very special. I'm not going to give too much, what happened in the studio, but
Sure.
for me, it was really an honor. I was already an actor back then because, as I was mentioning, I started acting in 2008. So during these couple of years, I developed my career. I started in this musical, but then I thought that if I wanted to develop that as a real career, I needed to have training. So I went to the States, I went to New York, get a training in musical theater, went back to France, did a 2-year course in acting so I could have like more solid foundation. And then I developed an acting career in France, acted on TV, on stage for films. So that was when Rithy called me. But it was actually the first time I did a voiceover. So yeah, amazing
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah, no, what an honor. I mean, I can only imagine just receiving that call and feeling so excited
Yeah.
to be a part of that. Art has seemed to be almost a mode of expression and something that has truly helped you not only discover parts of yourself, but heal
Mm.
parts of yourself. You and I have met when you came to the US. I think it was late last year. Now we're in 2025, but late last year when you were on your tour for your movie, My Mother's Tongue, and your book, Coming Out of My Skin. Let's first talk about the movie, My Mother's Tongue. What is the movie? What is the film, and what is the inspiration behind it?
So before it was a film, it was actually a sound work that was commissioned by the French Institute of Cambodia in 2022. And it was for an exhibition that was featuring Cambodian artists to be presented in France. So the director of the French Institute um, asked me to create a sound work around the theme of textile and fabric. And I was like, I don't really feel connected to that topic, to be honest. But instead of literally talking about, fabric and textile, I thought maybe I'm going to talk about language because for me, like languages are kind of threads, like connection. That can connect people, but that can be also, disconnected. And we kind of, have this invisible links through languages. So instead of literally like talking about clothes or whatever, I decided I want to do something around languages. I used the prompt different and he agreed to that. So like, okay, cool. So I created this work called My Mother's Tongue. At the very beginning, it was to question my relationship with Khmer language, right? Because I grew up speaking a Chinese dialect, Chao Chou or Teochew, we say Teochew. Um, and but the Cambodian language was not passed on to me, right? Even if my mom is half Khmer, half Chinese, my dad is ethnically Chinese, but they were both born in Cambodia, both educated in Cambodia, like their whole life is like in Cambodia, right? But they still decided not to pass on this language, even though between themselves they would speak Khmer. With their brothers and sisters, they would speak Khmer. With their friends, they would speak Khmer, but not to us. I was like, why is that? And then to me, as an adult, when I started to reconnect with Cambodia, I tried to learn Khmer. Right? I took so many lessons, private lessons. I went to like the Oriental language, like school in France, and I did try so many times, and I failed so many times, and I couldn't understand why. I was like, I speak 5 other languages, but that one I can't. Why is it? Right? Is it because the language is so difficult that I cannot speak it, or is there something else? So that's what I wanted to explore with that sound work. I wanted to go back um, and try to understand why was I resisting to speak Khmer, and does this have to do something with my relationship with my mother? Because we talk about mother tongue, right? So that's how I ended up, working on that work called My Mother's Tongue, kind of to reflect, that kind of triangle relationship between me, my mother, and her language, Khmer language. And when I was doing that, and then I toured to France with the work. It was in 2022, I think. Uh, no, 2021. And then actually my mom got sick and she passed, and that was in Cambodia. So when that happened, I thought that I wanted to extend the work and share about how the story evolved between us. Because the first part I was just mentioning, it was more about how we couldn't communicate because of that language barrier, right? And how I was trying to reclaim somehow that part of my identity through the language, but that didn't happen. But then, when she got sick and during that time, so we were able to reconnect regardless of the language. So I wanted to talk about that, right? So I extended the work and I went back to the studio after the tour in France. I wrote and created that second part of the sound work. And at the end, we wanted to show that to the Cambodian audience, but it was all in French, right? Like I wrote in French, the sound, like the voice, everything was in French. So we thought if we present that in Cambodia, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like people are not going to get it.
Right.
So we decided to translate in Khmer and in English to add subtitles to the work. But then what are we going to show, right? Are we going to just show like a black screen with subtitles? It's a sound work. But I thought, well, why not take this as an opportunity to add images And so it becomes something else, right? So that's when I started to work with Cambodian artist called Sao Sarmao. She does mixed media. She does digital drawing and photography. So the way we work together is that from the sound work, instead of, because I didn't want, to be a film, I still wanted sound to be the main focus. So what we did, we added photographs, and she would reveal slowly while I narrate, like scenes from the photograph. So she would draw, and we see sketches. It's a bit meditative. It's like slow pace. And then, yeah, the result was this 30-minute short film. Just a small parenthesis. We talked earlier about the missing picture, and actually that was a big inspiration for my film, because working with Rithy on that film, I saw how powerful it is just to have like not necessarily like big action on screen, but something you can focus on, and you have a voice narrating on top of it. And if the sound, the voice, the pace, like the rhythm, like helps you to draw, like to immerse into the story, you don't need like big action on the screen, right? So I thought, well, he did that. It's quite radical, right? Because film, you expect something like action, like to keep the attention. But Richie did the exact opposite. And I thought, oh, if he did that and it worked the way it did, let me try to do the same. So because it's quite long, like one scene is 5 minutes in my film. Like every 5 minutes, you see just one photo and drawing, revealing bit by bit. So it
Yes.
requires a little bit of patience, but I think it worked well.
Yes, I will be honest, it was the first of its kind that I feel like I have seen, but it is definitely, I see what you're saying in terms of it being meditative, because it is something that requires you to really pay attention and focus.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's contrary to the big Hollywood film where the sound is loud and the action is loud and everything is right in your face. This requires you to really sit, and you still can get a story from listening and paying attention to sound and watching something slowly develop. So
Mm.
I thought it was a very, very interesting and new take, something that I haven't seen before. For anybody who wants to see it, I'll maybe ask you towards the end where they can find it.
Mhm.
But the other work that you were touring was this book called Coming Out of My Skin. And this book right here is the only book out of the two books that has been translated in English. Is that right, Jean?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. Read this on a plane and I couldn't put it down. I remember thinking to myself that, out of all the books that I have picked up, this one felt so incredibly raw, and you truly poured all of you into writing this piece. Some topics being, I can only imagine, being incredibly vulnerable and incredibly hard to share with the world. So, Coming Out of My Skin, for everybody who has never heard of this, it is essentially a book about Jean navigating your identity within and racism within the gay homosexual community. And I guess I just want to start from the beginning, because I feel like this book truly kind of covers the underlying reasons why you were
Mm.
moving and
Yeah.
why you were going back and forth. It really gives you a good layout. But at what point did you feel like a book needed to be written about your experience? Or did you always know?
No, that's something I was actually a bit hesitant to do that. I was scared, to be honest,
I would be too.
because during the kind of before that work, actually, I never talk about myself. Even as an artist, I would do fiction. I would create characters to hide because I don't like to talk about. Even my friends, they don't know. I'm just, like the other day, I was meeting a friend of mine. We had dinner, and then I was mentioning something that happened to me that was quite intense a few years ago. And he said, like, I had no clue that happened to you. It's like, oh shit, he's my close friend. I don't even tell him like this kind of, I'm not supposed to, but if there was somebody I would share these kind of things to, that would be him, right? But I realized that I'm so private. Such a private person. And then like writing this book was a big challenge because it was for me to accept, to be vulnerable, to put myself out there. But at the same time, it was still an artwork, right? I didn't consider that as purely like publishing my journal, my diary or something. Because at the end of the day, what I wanted to do through that book was to reflect, just to take myself as kind of a material, my life journey as a material to talk more about society. What does it say? What does my life say about the French society we live in? The structural racism we face, the pressure we have on expectation, what we should be, what we should do because we look this way, because we love this way, because we grew up in that kind of environment. Like, how do we navigate all that? So that's kind of the main impulse of writing this book, right? It was more, okay, how do I use that? How do I make that as a story? It's a kind of an entry point to have a deeper, I would say, like reflection on life's journey and also on society's issues around race, especially, and identity.
I know that we touched upon it a little bit to kind of lay the foundation that in French society, um, it is a bit taboo to say that you are French, Cambodian, Chinese. It is better and more accepted, and society expects of you to really just say you are French. I know that we've had a conversation previously where it almost is taboo to even mention that racism is a thing in France, it seems like. And your book essentially says that it very much exists. And not only that, but it goes deeper into your experience and that it is very much existent within the homosexuality community and the gay community and how that has affected your life and your relationships. And so to release a work in a country, I don't know, this was released in France as well. Yeah,
Sure.
of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Last year.
Um, to release a work in a country that basically states everything that they are against, I can imagine can not only be scary, but can cause a lot of controversial conversations.
Mm.
How has this book so far been received? And also, how have you dealt with that controversy?
So the conversations around race, as you mentioned, are quite taboo until recently. If you talk about race, you are a racist. That's basically how people perceive you in France, right? So we cannot even address the issue because if we just dare to say, there's racism in, I don't know, police brutality or work, when you look for a job, when you look for an apartment and stuff like that, people would just claim you are the racist, right? Because you recognize yourself as a people of color and we're not supposed to. So you're part of the problem. You're creating a problem that doesn't exist. I mean, I'm being a bit caricatural here. I mean, just like as a shortcut, but
Sure, but
just
I
to tell you
understand.
how it is in France, like, yeah, the very word of race is even a taboo. You cannot even say it, right? But these conversations are now starting to take place more and more, and I would think it's probably been about 5 years, maybe around the Black Lives Matter, like that kind of arrived in France a little bit after, and we started to kind of also have this conversation because there were a lot of cases of police brutality and people were kind of like, oh, no, it has nothing to do with color. But then when you look at statistics, you're kind of like, maybe it has, right? If they only target the same kind of people, so, well, maybe there's like a bias somewhere.
Right.
So that's when we start to have this conversation. And then it went beyond just like police brutality and then other part of society. But for me, I wanted to specifically talk about what happened within the romantic sphere, right? Like in the gay community, the hookup scene. because I have experienced from the teenage years until recently, almost like I would say I'm looking back at, I don't know, like more than 20 years navigating this kind of romantic life, there was like a very upfront rejection towards Asian men, right? And it was like really clear, like on profiles, no Asians, no femmes, no Asians, no blacks. So you you couldn't pretend it was like around race. No, it was purely racial, right? So that happened like from my teenage years until now. So what I was, and I took that as a kind of an example, not an example, but kind of an entry point to talk about our relationship with the way we see race, right? Because if we claim we are colorblind, we don't make any difference between people, individuals, we all treat people the same, but then we say at the same time, I don't want to sleep with Asian people, black people are this, Arabs are that. So you clearly see something, right? Even if you claim you're colorblind. So what's going on there? What's up with the hypocrisy? So that's what I'm addressing in this book, right? It's like there's a kind of a cultural racism, something that is ingrained in our culture to make us categorize people by their ethnicity and put labels on that. So, certain groups are supposed to be more attractive than others. Certain groups are supposed to be less desirable than others. And where does that come from? And it comes from history, the colonial history of France, the way they build, this idea of superior races, inferior races, and also the just the media culture, the film culture, the literacy culture that created a lot of stereotypes around race and exotism, fetishism, all this kind of stuff that we're still dealing with, centuries later. So when people write things such as no Asians, no black, or black only, or blah, blah, blah fetish they have, that comes from somewhere else, right? That's what I was trying to address in this book, right? And I not only talk about myself and my personal experience, but then I also reference to studies, to, like sociology, to popular culture to back up what I'm saying. It's not only me living that. And then, of course, like there's the lived experience that is important, but then there's also like the facts and looking back at like history. So my book, to be honest, so the reception has been quite positive so far because I think I'm starting new conversations, right? In this time when I was saying we are having conversation about race, about how it affects people in their life. And it's, I think, the first book so far that talks about that specifically in the gay community, a person of color, of Asian descent. So people start to get interest because it's it's something new. It's something we don't talk about. I did have a little bit of negative response, and these negative response actually mainly came from the gay community. It's interesting for me to see because it's mainly, let's say the word, white people who would disagree with me, and they would just say that either it's in my head, they try to gaslight me, saying like, yeah, it doesn't exist, it's just you, whatever. Or they would say, like what I heard my whole life actually, they would just claim it's just a matter of taste, a matter of preference. It has nothing to do with racism, right? Just like, oh, I just don't date Asians because I don't think they're attractive. Like, for them it's just a taste. It has nothing to do with history or culture or representation. And I challenge that, but so far there hasn't been like a big I would say like backlash or there haven't been like big controversies, and I'm grateful because I know how violent it is. I've been working in the arts for a couple of years. I have friends of mine who are more frontal about their positions on structural racism, and they have to deal with so many threats and attacks every single day on social media. So I'm like, oh my, thank God I'm not there. I hope I won't be. But yeah, so far, what I think has been more positive is the interest it has created. But also, one thing I'm a bit not frustrated, but maybe it's going to take a little bit more time, is that a lot of people only see my book talking about the Asian experience within the gay community. So for them, it's like this something separate. It's something that doesn't affect them, right? It's like if you're not gay, if you're not Asian, if you're not of color, if you're not queer, then your experience will be different. You are not part of the problem. this topic does not concern you. And in fact, this is what I'm trying to challenge as well. I'm just taking myself as as an example to say that we all of us, because we were born in a culture that is structured that way, have different projection, interpretation based on color. And when it comes to the romantic sphere, when it comes to physical attraction, that even influence that. And you need to kind of realize that, because it's not only within the gay community. Of course, maybe we take it to an extreme, right? When we put it on our profile, no Asians, no this, no that. So it's very upfront. But if you look at yourself, like you could be like, I don't know, a white woman, you would still have a white straight woman, let's say, but you would still have bias in the way you would enter into a relationship or not, depending on the color of your potential partner, right? It concerns you as well. And that's what I'm trying to do, to say with my book. Is like, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the society, because that's how the society was built somehow, right? So I even took on studies that were made in the States, right? With that, dating website that did kind of a statistical studies, and they look very concretely that if you are a white man or if you're an Asian woman, you are more likely to get responses. But if you are a black woman or if you are an Asian male, you're less likely to get response. And that's not based on people saying, I think I'm this or that. It's just pure statistics, right? They just extract data and they see clearly, like, okay, these are the people who get more response. These are the people who get less. And that says something, right? People can deny as much as they want. It's factual.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's such a courageous topic to approach, and also to approach it from the angle of romantic relationships, because that is it is true, and I think anyone can relate to it. We don't talk about it a lot because it feels like, I mean, I'm here in America, but it feels like icky, and it makes us feel guilty
Mm.
if you really wanna think about it. But it is something that really it does exist, you know? We point it off as preference to what we like in a romantic partner, but do we ever question where those preferences come from, how those
Exactly.
preferences are molded? Not really, especially in a society in France, when everyone is so outwardly not racist. I can imagine how it can be a shock to them for somebody to say, to even bring up that, "Hey, do you know where your preferences are coming from?" But I think it is something that anybody can relate to. I mean, whether you are in the gay community, whether you are straight, it exists. We just don't really like to talk about it, but it exists and it's there. When you read your book, you really do share some of your raw experiences romantically, that I found so courageous for you to share with the world. What was your process in putting this together, and what was the hardest part of putting this book together?
For the process, I think I wanted to look chronologically. Is that a word in English?
Right, exactly, chronologically.
Yeah. So, I wanted to kind of focus on important episodes in my life, right? That say something either around race, around sexual identity. So I extracted those, right? And then maybe the hardest part for me too was to be vulnerable and reveal the more painful episodes of my life. But I thought that was necessary, especially when we talk about structural racism. In fact, for me, it's beyond racism. It's structural violence, cultural violence, right? And for me, within the gay community, we are exposed from a very young age to predators, to violence. The way we are initiated to sex is really brutal. You don't know anything. You're here, you're 15, you end up in an app, and boom, you're just like thrown in like like I don't know, like a shark
Shark
tank.
Tank, Shark Tank.
Yeah, yeah, and you don't know anything about life. You're still figuring out who you are, what you like, and then you know. And this is something I'm questioning because that's my experience. I was introduced to all that at a very young age, and that like my first relationships were quite brutal. And I think it has structured a way. Even me as an adult now, I'm looking back and I'm trying to reflect even at today, like the way I would consider the act of sex or hooking up or just getting in relationship with someone. Like I have integrated that it needs to be like that, like boom. And
Mhm.
why? And I think we don't even question that. It's just how it is, right? And I think it leads to a lot of abuses, and we don't talk about that. We don't even say the word, right? We don't even think about consent in our gay community. It's like you want something, you get it. If the person cannot, if the person cannot reject you, like physically, like that's his problem. So it means he wanted it, right? And that's something so wrong in that. That's also what I wanted to address in my book. So in order to do that, I wanted to kind of make myself vulnerable to say, this is what happened when I was 15, and then it happened again when I was that age, and then it happened in another situation, and it happens actually to a lot of us, a lot of us. And I don't want to portray this gay community as, we all perverts and this and that. But we need to have this conversation. I'm mainly thinking also about how we perpetrate that culture, right? And if we don't at some point start to integrate that, integrate that, then we're just going to reproduce the same over and over again. And for the younger generation, it's going to be the same for them. They're going to be introduced that way. They're going to have that as a culture. They're going to pass it on to the next generation. So I think at some point, before we break the cycle, we need to at least be conscious that something's going on, right? So this is, for me, the conversations I'm trying to have, right? So it's not only about being gay, Asian, whatever. It's more like talk about all these different
Mhm.
cultural, violence that we have.
Yeah, yeah. I have seen in my own experiences with the gay people that I know in my life, and I have heard about very similar uh,
Mm,
cultural cultural violences within their community that they just accept. And although it is, although it is not something that I have personally experienced, it is something that I have heard that that is just the way it is within the community. I wonder, is anyone else talking about this or in France particularly? Because I don't know what the gay community is like and how it's perceived in France.
I think
Is anybody is anybody talking about it, or are you kind of the first one to really poke at it?
it's starting. So a few years ago, we started to have like this Me Too gay movement in
Okay.
France. It didn't really pick up, but it started something. It was a little bit after the Me Too, so it was a few years ago. And then we had again a few months ago something started like Me Too garçon. Garçon means boys or young men. So like to say that the Me Too also happened to men, not only to women.
Right.
And within the gay community, yeah, it's starting. It's like I'm not the only one. And there are like, people on social media who try to address that, like even the gay media, magazines and websites. So they start to do podcasts and write articles about the notion of consent, about the things we need to change in our hookup culture. So yes, it is starting, but there's a big resistance. And I think it's normal whenever we try to, impulse change, right? There will always be a resistance. And I think the main resistance is from people who have integrated that and say, well, that's how it is, and that's just how it is, right? But other people also claim that they 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 fought so hard to get this sexual freedom that they don't want people to come and, you know, putting kind of, how would I say
Barriers
this? Like,
around it
yeah,
or
exactly.
changing it. Yes.
Yeah. Because it's like for them, gay people were being attacked, discriminated, killed sometimes because of their sexuality, and they had to kind of like leave their sexuality hidden or like take a lot of precautions. So now they have this right to let's say like fuck however they want. So they don't want people to interfere in that, right? So, and I hear the argument, but I just feel that there should be other ways, right, to be kinder to each other, to respect more each other and ourselves as well. Because I think when we come to that part, like when the hookup culture is so strong and you don't even question at the end your own desire, your own willingness to do something, you're just like, oh, it's automatic. It's like that. You just like, that's how it is. Like, well, maybe we need to step back a little bit and really question that's how it should be or not.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting for the people who argue that, they fought so hard to have this sexual freedom that they just want to be, I guess, quote, free and do whatever they want. And it makes me question, is this really what they want? It's like, is this baseline this baseline of acceptance of the violence and acceptance of the forcefulness of the culture?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? If that is truly what you consider free, what does that tell you about yourself? And I don't know, like, um it feels animalistic almost, and is that
Mm-hmm.
is that right, and is that should that be the baseline? So I don't know if I'm one to speak, because again, I am not part of the
Mm-hmm.
community, but those are just questions in my head that
Sure.
I would imagine there's so many ways you can go about it, so many different perspectives around it, but
But to me, this is part of a structural violence, and maybe again, the gay people would take it to an extreme, but it comes also from the patriarchy, right? It's still sexual violence perpetrated by men in a kind of a power position,
Mhm.
and that doesn't just happen within the gay community, right? I mean, obviously, that is something I think I want to take as an example within the gay community, but to rethink the whole system, the whole way we perceive like one another. How do we interact with one another? And I think like you use, I think the image of like something kind of like linked to animals.
Animalistic, yes.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of the way society, for me, like a lot of time, I would think that's how human act. Like we just think the world is at our disposal, right? And we just take it. The world, the resource, everything, the people. So that's what I think we need to change. Like this kind of like predator culture.
Well, I think your book is amazing. I couldn't put it down when I was on the plane. I think anyone can listen to this conversation and think, wow, there's so many different aspects to this book. And it's absolutely right. You touch upon so many different things, and I'm glad you said it, but it's not just applicable to the gay community. There's so many themes in this book that I think are applicable, that talk about society, that talk about, as you said, the patriarchy, power, structure, racism, and how all of that kind of plays into a person's identity and
Mhm.
seeds out into their romantic relationships. So, Jean, where can people find this book, your work, and also what is coming next for you?
Yeah. So the book is available. I mean, it's been translated in English, so it's available. You can buy it. You can order online, find it in the bookstore. For the film, it's not online yet because I'm still showing the work, touring with it. But you can find me on Instagram, send me a DM, and I will gladly send you the link. And what's next? So actually, the book Coming Out of My Skin is right now being translated in Khmer, and it will be released maybe this year or probably next year in Cambodian language. And I'm right now working on a stage version of the book in Cambodia. So I'm in Phnom Penh right now. And so in March, we'll be performing a stage adaptation of the book in Khmer. So I'm really excited about that. And there's another project I'm working on right now because, as you probably know, in 2025, we are commemorating the 50-year anniversary of the beginning of the Cambodian genocide. So 17th of April 1975, it was when the Khmer Rouge took Phnom Penh capital and then started their regime. So that's a very important symbolic date for Cambodian people because it really marks the beginning of the genocide, but also like, how the life of the entire population change from that date, right? So I know there are a lot of events happening around the world for this commemoration. And with Cambodian Living Arts, so the organization I used to work for, so we decided to have a global initiative where we invited different diaspora to come together for a 12-hour event. So it's very ambitious. So there will be 5 countries, sorry. So we're going to start in Cambodia, then move to Australia, move to France, move to the US, Canada. And during 12 hours, so it's going to be continuous. Like each country is going to have uh, an event, a physical event, where they will be sharing a moment with their community. So the activities will be different in each country. It could be like a workshop, it could be a talk, it could be like an art performance, it could be like a ritual. So we're gonna release a program soon. But yeah, everything, is gonna be taking place physically, but also online. So people can even log in and see what's going on in Australia, in Long Beach, in Paris, in Montreal. And we came with this idea because, well, that's reality. Cambodian diaspora we spread all over the world because of that 17th of April, right? So we have all this diaspora now. We're all separated, but linked somehow, you know, to this history, to this date. So that's why we wanted to do that. And because of all the different time zone, we wanted something to be long enough. So no matter where you are in this planet, there will be something, during your daytime you can log and be part of. So this initiative is called Act of Memory. It's going to be released on a website called Season of Cambodia, seasonofcambodia.com. So right now we're still finalizing the details about the program and so on, but it will happen on the 20th of April. We wanted to do it on the 17th, but because it's a Thursday, it was a little bit more challenging, to get audience and so on. So the 17th, we're still going to have something. So the 17th, we're going to have a moment with all the co-organizers. So we're going to be together on that symbolic date to share a moment of silence and to commemorate, but also to talk about our respective contexts, Canada, France, Australia, US, Cambodia, and then kind of describe what we're going to do on the 20th and invite the people to come back.
So just to be clear, is this something that you can either attend or you can log on virtually? It will be happening during the 12-hour period. There will be different blocks on depending on what country you are on when it
Exactly.
starts, I'm assuming,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And then it would be for one particular country, a specific activity that you would
Mhm.
do to commemorate either a moment of silence or something to commemorate the fact that it's 50 years, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that's what's been great with this process because we've been working on that for the past 5 months or so already. So each people that I've been working with, they are kind of community leaders. For example, in Sydney, they work with this local pagoda. In Montreal, it's a collective of second generation Cambodian who work around themes of, like identity. And in Chicago, we work with the Killing Fields Memorial. So it's something different. And in Paris, it's also a collective second generation. So yeah, so it's like different group working with different communities, doing different stuff. So it's going to be different. Like each session is going to Cambodia, of course, it's important. We're going to start with Cambodia. We work with Bopana Center that was founded by Rithy Panh. So with Bopana, so we're also working on something around history and the historical context of 17th of April and how the younger generation engage with that through, education. So yeah, so it's very exciting. It's very different. But so yeah, I hope that of course 12 hours is a bit long, but at least I hope that the people can connect to either one or several of these events.
That's an amazing initiative. At least it gives something for the entire diaspora, no matter where you are, gives you a chance to connect with the fact that it has been 50 years since the
Hmm.
Khmer Rouge, and wherever you are in the world, you're able, even if it's for a moment, you can connect virtually or in person, but
Exactly.
you can have that moment for yourself to kind of recognize how far our people have come from 1975, right?
Yes, totally.
Well, Jean, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing about your experience and your story and, your extremely vulnerable but amazing book Coming Out of My Skin. Everybody, I have a copy of it here and I recommend anybody who is listening to go and get a copy and read his book. It is, you can get through it. I got through it on a plane ride and I really couldn't put it down, let me tell you. So thank you so much for coming on here and sharing and being so vulnerable, but also being so courageous to attack the topics that I feel like many people are scared of attacking because it is not easy and it is not always something that makes people feel good to talk about. But I think that is all the reason why we need to start having these conversations. We need to start questioning our biases and the reason behind them. So I appreciate you, Jean, so much. Thank you for coming on to the podcast. And yeah, no, I can't wait to come to see what's coming out next.
Thank you so much for this conversation.